Ethics Part 3, The Ring of Gyges. The Ring of Gyges is part of the larger work, The Republic. What is occurring is that we have the characters of Socrates, Glaucon, and others speaking about the matter of justice. Glaucon, interestingly or boringly enough, is the actual brother of Plato, and we begin this Ring of Gyges with a challenge put forth from Glaucon. Glaucon wants to hear a defense of justice, a defense that justice is better than injustice. And he makes a challenge rather difficult, because he wants to hear justice praised for itself. That is, a defense of justice having an intrinsic value. What he's going to do is speak at length in praise of the unjust life, taking on the role that's often described as, these days, the devil's advocate. So although he wants Socrates to defend justice, he, Glaucon, intends to present the best case possible for the unjust life. Now it begins by looking at injustice and justice, specifically the nature and origin of justice as he sees it. He contends that people say that to do wrong is naturally good, to be wronged is bad. Now what he has in mind here is not necessarily like crazy evil stuff, just like running around murdering people and destroying things. He means essentially that to do wrong, to gain an advantage, is good, and of course to be wronged is bad. To use sort of an example that's obviously not in the original Ring of Gyges, imagine, if you will, that you're in competition for a promotion with someone, and the promotion rests on a key presentation. You notice that your opponent has left their laptop and their backup drive conveniently on the industrial shredder. Now the sort of injustice Glaucon has in mind would be something like this. Suppose they leave it there and they go into the bathroom, and you happen to wander by and bump their laptop and their backup into the shredder, and they go into their presentation and they have nothing. They're basically pointing at a whiteboard trying to reconstruct all their charts and graphs. And of course the odds of their succeeding would be rather low. And of course you have your laptop safe and you're able to give a wonderful presentation, thus securing the job. Now to be wronged, of course, as Glaucon says, is bad. And so to switch the scenario around, if your laptop was foolishly left by the industrial shredder along with all your backups and it was shredded, that would of course be regarded as bad. So, as he sees it, people say that to do wrong is naturally good, to be wronged is bad. Now people quickly realize that the suffering of injury so far exceeds in badness the good of inflicting it. And so the basic idea is that people realize that what we get out of inflicting onto others is pretty good, but the injury we receive from badness exceeds it. So, as Glaucon sees it, when we have done wrong to others, and probably enjoyed it, and suffered it, and clearly not enjoyed it, that is to say, we've been on both ends of the stick, holding it gives someone a jab of injustice in the eye, and then of course taking the shot ourselves. We realize this is not a desirable scenario, and so those are able to avoid suffering wrong and practice doing wrong freely with impunity decide it is profitable to come to an agreement with each other. And so essentially, at least according to Glaucon, we agree that we should not inflict injury to each other nor suffer it. As a result, we make laws and covenants, and we call these commands lawful and just. So the essential idea is that we regard doing wrong to others as good, being wronged as bad. And once we get a taste of both ends of this, we decide to make agreements, and we call this agreement justice. So, as Glaucon sees it, the origin and essence of justice is this. It is a mean between two extremes, the very best and the very worst. The very best is to be able to do wrong without paying the penalty for the wrongdoing, and the worst, of course, is to be wronged without the power of revenge. So the just is a mean between these two extremes, the most desirable, being able to get away with anything with no penalty, and of the worst, being a victim with no capacity for vengeance. Now, why do we welcome and honor this justice? Well, according to Glaucon, we welcome it because we lack the power to do wrong. If someone had the power to get away with it, to inflict injustice, with no fear of it being inflicted upon them, it would be foolish, madness for them to agree to this, because they would have nothing to gain and everything to lose. So Glaucon's explanation as to why people are just is that they do this against their will, because they lack the power to do wrong. Now, to establish this, to prove this, he presents a thought experiment. A thought experiment is, of course, when one thinks through what would likely to happen in the event of a made-up scenario. Philosophers often use thought experiments because we generally don't have very good budgets or equipment, so we kind of have to rely on thought experiments. Interestingly or boringly enough, scientists also rely on them. For example, Einstein famously developed much of his theories based on thought experiments. So they're useful not only in philosophy, but science as well. But to return to the main point of the Ring of Gyges, according to Glaucon, we would realize that people are only just because they are weak, because they lack the strength and power to do injustice and get away with it. And we would realize this if, in this thought experiment, we imagined granting to both the just and unjust the freedom to do whatever they might like, to do as they will with no fear of retaliation. We could then follow them and observe them and see where their desire leads them. According to Glaucon, we would see the just person, or rather the allegedly just person, traveling the very same road as the unjust. The explanation he gives is rather interesting. He claims is that all organisms, all living creatures, by their very nature, pursue undue gain as a good. So his assumption is that everything wants more than its due. And this, of course, is an empirical hypothesis, something we can consider by examining the behavior of actual people and critters. So why then do we not do this? Well, as he notes, the law forcibly sidetracks us to honor equality. So we all want to get far more than we deserve, but we are compelled or forced. Now, he avails himself of a Greek myth or legend, which is, of course, the story of the actual Ring of Gyges. In this story, Gyges was a shepherd in service to the king of Lydia, and he was out shepherding, and there was a terrible storm, and then an earthquake split the earth open, and he gazed into the crack in the ground, and he saw a mysterious bronze horse with many windows, and summoning up his courage, he went down into the chasm, entered into the mysterious horse, and found in there the body of a giant. And on the body of the giant he found a ring. He took the ring, put it on his finger, and then left, forgetting about it. Some while later, he was at the court of the king, reporting on the shepherding, presumably presenting various PowerPoint slides, etc. Now, he fiddled with the ring, and he noticed it allowed him to become invisible. No one could see him. So what did he do? Well, to make a long and bloody story short, he used the ring to murder the king, and, with the help of the king's wife, to take over the kingdom. So essentially went up to her and said, "Hey baby, look what I can do. I can turn invisible." And she assisted him, and he takes over the kingdom, and in the story they live happily ever after. And in fact, interestingly enough, the people that are descended from Gyges claim this is the story of how they ascended the throne of Lydia. So what is the point being presented by Glaucon? Well, the point is this. If you had the allegedly just person and an unjust person, and each one was given this a ring of invisibility. He claims they would act in exactly the same way. And he takes this as proving that no one is just willingly. They are only just because of compulsion. So as he sees it, justice is not your private good. It's not something that is good for you, because, at least according to his thought experiment, whenever a person thought they could do wrong with impunity, they would do so. Why? Well, his explanation is that deep down, everyone believes injustice is more profitable than justice, that it's better to be evil than good. Now, he does consider the possibility that someone could have such a ring and not wish to do wrong with that opportunity. They might, imagine some company say, hey, look, I have a ring of invisibility, and they turn invisible. And you might say to them, what are you doing with a ring? They said, oh, nothing wrong, of course. I'm a good person. I'm only doing good things with it. I'm helping people, in secret. That way I can help them without, being prideful. I'm doing all kinds of good things with it. Now, according to Glaucon, if someone told us that, we would think them foolish and miserable. We'd probably say, oh, the things that I would do if I had that ring. But of course, unless one was foolish, one would praise that person for fear of being wronged. So I would never suggest to the person that they do terrible things because, of course, they might decide that those terrible things should be done to me. Now he presents, at the end of this particular part, the challenge, the choice between the two lives. What he proposes as a contest between the most just person and the most unjust person, face to face. Now the conditions of this challenge are very extreme. The unjust person, by hypothesis, must be perfect in his injustice. He will be like a clever craftsman. He will know what he can do and what he cannot do, and will only attempt to do what he believes he can do. And of course, since this is a hypothetical situation, if he slips up, he'll be able to set things right. Now, when he succeeds at his wrongdoing, these remain secret, because if he's caught, he would be a poor performer indeed. So essentially what Glaucon is proposing is a person who's able to do injustice, but not be punished, because no one knows that he's doing this injustice. In fact, to make the case even more challenging, Glaucon says this unjust person must have a reputation for justice. So even though he is the most unjust of people, he has a perfect reputation for justice. Now naturally, Glaucon is being somewhat realistic. The person must be able to preserve this reputation. So they must have the ability to persuade people. So if it seems like they're doing something unjust, they can sway people with their silver tongue and honeyed words into believing that what they're doing is not only okay, but laudable, praiseworthy. And of course, they must have the capacity to use force, because if someone perhaps discovered this, their injustice, they might have to make people vanish. But of course, that would be carefully concealed. Naturally, they must also have courage, strength, friends, and wealth. So the unjust person is truly unjust, but they have a reputation of sterling justice, and they have all the means necessary to either avoid getting caught or to ensure that the story never leaks out. So we're asked to imagine a person of injustice who is able to avoid all the external punishments, because by hypothesis, nothing can catch him and no one can harm him for his injustice. In fact, he also gains all the benefits of appearing just, for all the rewards of seeming good are given to him. So he's in an ideal, or so it seems, situation, namely that no one knows of his wickedness, and so all regard him as just. And so he avoids all the punishments that one would get for being wicked, yet while getting all the rewards one would receive for a good and just reputation. Now put up against this paragon of injustice is the paragon of justice, the just person. The just person is simple and noble. Now, an interesting modification to the challenge, The just person, despite their being truly just, they have a reputation not for justice. Their reputation for justice in this challenge must be taken away. Why? Well, the reputation of justice would bring rewards. It would be not clear whether the just person was being just for the sake of justice or for the sake of the benefits of that reputation. So they must have the truth of justice, but not the reputation for justice. In fact, the person must be stripped of everything but justice, and of course their life. And they must be the opposite of the perfectly unjust person. How so? Well, though the perfectly just person never does any wrong, in fact is just, they must have a reputation for wrongdoing. Why? Why this terrible condition? Well, for Glaucon, this is so the just person can be tested for justice by not weakening under the ill repute and consequences. So the challenge is indeed difficult. The perfectly unjust person is perfectly unjust on the inside, but seems to be perfectly just. And all believe this, except he knows better, of course, and his reputation remains intact. He is never punished from the outside, and he gets all the rewards from the outside of being good. In contrast, the just person only has justice, and of course, the terrible reputation for being unjust. Now, it might be wondered if this is not just entirely fictional, but, interestingly or boringly enough, it's easy to find examples of people through history who are regarded as good, and are still regarded as basically good, even though we found out some things about them that are terribly unjust. But they're able to essentially use persuasion and restore their reputation. And of course, it's easy to imagine someone who's better at the people that we have seen revealed as being unjust, and they're able to be unjust and get away with it. In the case of people who are just and are looked upon as terrible criminals, history is full of examples of such people. For example, people who are Christians can point to Jesus, even though he's regarded, of course, as being a person of great goodness and justice. In his own time, he was executed as a criminal. You can also look at, for example, people in the civil rights movement in the United States. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was regarded by many as a wrongdoer, as being a troublemaker, being unjust. But today, we regard him as being a just person. So it's not impossible, or even difficult to imagine someone who is wicked, yet no one knows this. And it's even less difficult to imagine someone who is good, but no one knows this. In fact, they're regarded as being a bad person. And this is the challenge put forth by Glaucon, that given those conditions, under which one person is unjust, but seems just, another person is just, but seems unjust, to judge which of the two is happier. And that is the challenge of the Ring of Gyges.